Sven Olof Joachim Palme was a Swedish Social Democratic politician, statesman and Prime Minister. A long-time copyright of Prime Minister Tage Erlander, Palme led the Swedish Social Democratic Party (SAP) from 1969 until his assassination in 1986, and was a two-term Prime Minister of Sweden, heading a Privy Council Government from 1969 to 1976 and a cabinet government from 1982 until his death. Electoral defeats in 1976 and 1979 marked the end of social democratic hegemony in Swedish politics, which had seen 40 years of unbroken rule by the party. While leader of opposition, he parted domestic and international interests and served as special mediator of the United Nations in the Iran-Iraq War, but returned to power as Prime Minister after electoral victories in 1982 and 1985. A pivotal, renowned, and polarizing figure domestically as well as in international politics since the 1960s, Palme was steadfast in his non-alignment policy towards the superpowers, juxtaposed to support of numerous Third World liberation movements following the process of decolonization including, most controversially, economic and vocal support for a number of Third World governments which were guilty of gross violations of human rights. Most famously, he was the first Western head of government to visit Cuba after its revolution, giving a speech in Santiago praising contemporary Cuban and Cambodian revolutionaries. Frequently a critic of U.S. and Soviet foreign policy, he resorted to fierce and often polarizing criticism in pinpointing his resistance towards imperialist ambitions and authoritarian regimes, including those of Francisco Franco of Spain, António de Oliveira Salazar of Portugal, Gustavo Henrique of Czechoslovakia, B.J. Vista and P.W. Botha of South Africa. His 1972 condemnation of the Hanoi bombings, notably comparing the tactic to the Treblinka extermination camp, resulted in a temporary freeze in Sweden-United States relations. Palme's steadfast opposition to apartheid, which he labeled a particularly gruesome system, gave rise to theories of South African involvement in his death, which were further fueled when Eugene de Kock claimed South African security forces had orchestrated his death. His murder by an unapprehended assailant on a street in Stockholm on February 28, 1986 was the first of its kind in modern Swedish history, the first of a national leader since Gustav III, and had a great impact across Scandinavia. Local convict and addict Christer Pettersson was convicted of the murder but was acquitted on appeal by the Svea Court of Appeal. Early life, Palme was born into an upper-class, conservative family in Östermalm, Stockholm, Sweden. His father, a businessman, was of Dutch ancestry, and his mother, Frian von Neeriem, was of Baltic German origin and had arrived in Sweden as a refugee in 1915. Great-grandfather Alexander von Neeriem was an Attorney General of the Senate of Russian Empire, senator and member of the State Council of Imperial Russia. Palme's father died when he was 6 years old. Despite his upper-class background, his political orientation came to be influenced by social democratic attitudes. His travels in the Third World, as well as the United States, where he saw deep economic inequality and racial segregation, helped to develop these views. A sickly child, Olof Palme received his education from private tutors. Even as a child he gained knowledge of 2 foreign languages. He studied at the Sigtuna School of Liberal Arts, one of Sweden's few residential high schools, and passed the university entrance examination with high marks at the early age of 17. He did his military service at K3 and became 1956 a reserve officer with the rank of lieutenant. After his military service he enrolled at the University of Stockholm. On a scholarship, he studied at Kenyon College, Ohio, 1947–1948, graduating with a BA. Inspired by radical debate in the student community, he wrote a critical essay on Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. Palme wrote his senior honor thesis on the United Auto Workers Union, led at the time by Walter Reuther. After graduation he traveled throughout the country and eventually ended up in Detroit, where his hero Reuther agreed to an interview which lasted several hours. In later years, Palme regularly remarked during his many subsequent American visits, that the United States had made him a socialist, a remark that often has caused confusion. Within the context of his American experience, it was not that Palme was repelled by what he found in America, but rather that he was inspired by it. After hitchhiking through the USA and Mexico, he returned to Sweden to study law at Stockholm University. In 1949 he became a member of the Swedish Social Democratic Party. During his time at university, Palme became involved in student politics, working with the Swedish National Union of Students. In 1951, he became a member of the Social Democratic Student Association in Stockholm, although it is asserted he did not attend their political meetings at the time. The following year he was elected president of the Swedish National Union of Students. As a student politician he concentrated on international affairs and traveled across Europe. Palme attributed his becoming a socialist to three major influences. In 1947, he attended a debate on taxes between the Social Democrat Ernst Wigforss, the conservative George Hjalmarson and the liberal Elin Anderson. The time he spent in the United States in the 1940s made him realize how wide the class divide was in America, and the extent of racism against black people. And, a trip to Asia, specifically India, Ceylon, Burma, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, and Japan in 1953 had opened his eyes to the consequences of colonialism and imperialism. Political career: in 1953, Palme was recruited by the Social Democratic Prime Minister Tage Erlander to work in his secretariat. From 1955 he was a board member of the Swedish Social Democratic Youth League and lectured at the Youth League College Bommersvik. He also was a member of the Workers' Educational Association. In 1957 he was elected as a Member of Parliament represented Jar Paragraph NKA Paragraph Ping County in the directly elected First Chamber of the Riksdag. In the early 1960s Palme became a member of the Agency for International Assistance and was in charge of inquiries into assistance to the developing countries and educational aid. In 1963, he became a member of the cabinet, as minister without portfolio in the Cabinet Office, and retained his duties as a close political advisor to Prime Minister Tage Erlander. In 1965, he became Minister of Transport and Communications. One issue of special interest to him was the further development of radio and television, while ensuring their independence from commercial interests. In 1967 he became Minister of Education, and the following year, he was the target of strong criticism from left-wing students protesting against the government's plans for university reform. The protests culminated with the occupation of the Student Union building in Stockholm. Palme came there and tried to comfort the students, urging them to use democratic methods for the pursuit of their cause. When party leader Tage Erlander stepped down in 1969, Palme was elected as the new leader by the Social Democratic Party Congress and succeeded Erlander as Prime Minister. His pro-to-copyright copyright and political ally, Bent Carlson, who was appointed UN Commissioner for Namibia in July 1987, was killed in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland on December 21, 1988 en route to the UN signing ceremony of the New York Accords the following day. Palme was said to have had a profound impact on people's emotions. He was very popular among the left, but harshly detested by most liberals and conservatives. This was due in part to his international activities, especially those directed against the U.S. foreign policy, and in part to his aggressive and outspoken debating style. Policies. As leader of a new generation of Swedish Social Democrats, Olof Palme was often described as a revolutionary reformist. Domestically, his democratic socialist views, especially the drive to expand labor union influence over business ownership, engendered a great deal of hostility from the organized business community. During the tenure of Olof Palme, several major reforms in the Swedish constitution were carried out, such as orchestrating a switch from bicameralism to unicameralism in 1969 and in 1975 replacing the 1809 instrument of government with a new one officially establishing parliamentary democracy rather than de jure monarchic autocracy, abolishing the cabinet meetings chaired by the king and stripping the monarchy of all formal political powers. His reforms on labor market included establishing a law which increased job security. In the Swedish 1973 general election, The Socialist Communist and the Liberal Conservative blocs got 175 places each in the Riksdag. The Palme cabinet continued to govern the country, but several times they had to draw lots to decide on some issues, although most important issues were decided through concessional agreement. Tax rates also rose from being fairly low even by European standards to the highest levels in the Western world. Under Olof Palme's premiership tenure, matters concerned with childcare centres, social security, protection of the elderly, accident safety, and housing problems received special attention. Under Palme, the public health system in Sweden became efficient, with the infant mortality rate standing at 12 per 1,000 live births. An ambitious redistributive program was carried out, with special help provided to the disabled, immigrants, the low-paid, single-parent families, and the old. The Swedish welfare state was significantly expanded from a position already one of the most far-reaching in the world during his time in office. As noted by Isabella Mez, during the first half of the 70s a Euro-wide level of benefits provided by every subsystem of the welfare state improved significantly. Various policy changes increased the basic old age pension replacement rate from 42% of the average wage in 1969 to 57%, while a health care reform carried out in 1974 integrated all health services and increased the minimum replacement rate from 64% to 90% of earnings. In 1974, supplementary unemployment assistance was established, providing benefits to those workers ineligible for existing benefits. In 1971, eligibility for invalidity pensions was extended with greater opportunities for employees over the age of 60. In 1974, universal dental insurance was introduced, and former maternity benefits were replaced by a parental allowance. In 1974, housing allowances for families with children were raised and these allowances were extended to other low-income groups. Childcare centres were also expanded under Palme, and separate taxation of husband and wife introduced. Access to pensions for older workers in poor health was liberalised in 1970, and a disability pension was introduced for older unemployed workers in 1972. The Palme cabinet was also active in the field of education, introducing such reforms as a system of loans and benefits for students, regional universities, and preschool for all children. Under a law of 1970, in the upper secondary school system a Euro-gymnasium, a Euro-Oafaxschool, a Euro and vocational, a Euro-Archeschool, a Euro were integrated to form one school with 3 sectors. In 1975, a law was passed that established free admission to universities. A number of reforms were also carried out to enhance workers' rights. An Employment Protection Act of 1974 introduced rules regarding consultation with unions, notice periods, and grounds for dismissal, together with priority rules for dismissals and re-employment in case of redundancies. That same year, work environment improvement grants were introduced and made available to modernizing firms. A Euro conditional upon the presence of union-appointed a Euro safety stewards, a Euro unregistered trademark to review the introduction of new technology with regard to the health and safety of workers, a Euro in 1976. An Act on Co-Determination at Work was introduced that allowed unions to be consulted at various levels within companies before major changes were enforced that would affect employees, while management had to negotiate with labor for joint rights in all matters concerning organization of work, hiring and firing, and key decisions affecting the workplace. Olof Palme's last government, elected during a time when Sweden's economy was in difficult shape, sought to pursue a third way, designed to stimulate investment, production, and employment, having ruled out classical Keynesian policies as a result of the growing burden of foreign debt, together with a big balance of payments and budget deficits. This involved equality of sacrifice, whereby wage restraint would be accompanied by increases in welfare provision and more progressive taxation. For instance, taxes on wealth, gifts, and inheritance were increased, while tax benefits to shareholders were either reduced or eliminated. In addition, various welfare cuts carried out before Olof's return to office were rescinded. The previous system of indexing pensions and other benefits was restored, the grant-in-aid scheme for municipal child care facilities was re-established, Unemployment insurance was restored in full, and the so-called €1 no benefit days €1 for those drawing sickness benefits were cancelled. Increases were also made to both food subsidies and child allowances, while the employee investment funds were introduced. An outspoken supporter of gender equality, Palme sparked interest for women's rights issues by attending a World Women's Conference in Mexico. In 1968, Palme was a driving force behind the release of documentary Don Coloros Mods. The controversial movie, depicting two social outcasts, was scheduled to be released in an edited form, but Palme thought the material was too socially important to be cut. As a forerunner in green politics, Olof Palme was a firm believer in nuclear power as a necessary form of energy, at least for a transitional period to curb the influence of fossil fuel. His intervention in Sweden's 1980 referendum on the future of nuclear power is often pinpointed by opponents of nuclear power as saving it. As of 2011, nuclear power remains one of the most important sources of energy in Sweden, much attributed to Palme's actions. Shortly before his assassination, Palme had been accused of being pro-Soviet and not sufficiently safeguarding Sweden's national interest. Arrangements had therefore been made for him to go to Moscow to discuss a number of contentious bilateral issues, including alleged Soviet submarine incursions into Swedish waters. On the international scene, Palme was a widely recognized political figure because of his harsh and emotional criticism of the United States over the Vietnam War. Vocal opposition to the crashing of the Prague Spring by the Soviet Union. Criticism of European communist regimes, including labeling the Hoxha regime as the creature of dictatorship in 1975. Campaigning against nuclear weapons proliferation. Criticism of the Franco regime in Spain, calling the regime the devil's murderers after its execution of ETA and FRAP nationalists in September 1975. Opposition to apartheid, branding it as a particularly gruesome system, and support for economic sanctions against South Africa. Support, both political and financial, for the African National Congress, the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Polisario Front. Visiting Fidel Castro's Cuba in 1975, during which he denounced Fulgencio Batista's government and praised contemporary Cuban and Cambodian revolutionaries. Strong criticism of the Pinochet regime in Chile. Support, both political and financial, for the FMLN FDR in El Salvador and the FSLN in Nicaragua. And, role as a mediator in the Iran-Iraq War. All of this ensured that Palme had many opponents abroad. On February 21, 1968, Palme participated in a protest in Stockholm against U.S. involvement in the war in Vietnam together with the North Vietnamese ambassador to the Soviet Union Nguyen Vu Chan. The protest was organized by the Swedish Committee for Vietnam, and Palme and Nguyen were both invited as speakers. As a result of this, the U.S. recalled its ambassador from Sweden, and Palme was fiercely criticized by the opposition for his participation in the protest. On December 23, 1972, Palme made a speech in Swedish national radio where he compared the ongoing U.S. bombings of Hanoi to historical atrocities, namely the bombing of Guernica, the massacres of Oradour-sur-Glane, Barbia, Katyn, Lidis and Sharperville, and the extermination of Jews and other groups at Treblinka. The U.S. government called the comparison a gross insult, and once again decided to freeze its diplomatic relations with Sweden. Despite such associations and contrary to stated Social Democratic Party policy, Sweden had in fact secretly maintained extensive military cooperation with NATO over a long period, and was even under the protection of a U.S. military security guarantee. In response to Palme's remarks in a meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Sweden ahead of the Socialist International meeting in Helsingør in January 1976, Kissinger asked the U.S. ambassador to convey my personal appreciation to Palme for his frank presentation. Assassination. Security had never been a major issue, and Olof Palme could often be seen without any bodyguard protection. The night of his murder was one such occasion. Walking home from a cinema with his wife Lisbeth Palme in the central Stockholm streets Arvidsjaur, close to midnight on February 28, 1986, the couple was attacked by an assassin. Palme was fatally shot in the back at close range. a second shot was fired at Lisbeth Palme, the bullet grazing her back. She survived without serious injuries. Police said that a taxi driver used his radio to raise the alarm. Two young girls sitting in a car close to the scene of the shooting also tried to help the Prime Minister. He was rushed to hospital but was pronounced dead on arrival at 06 CET the next day. Deputy Prime Minister Ingvar Carlsson immediately assumed the duties of Prime Minister, a post he retained until 1991. He also took over the leadership of the Social Democratic Party, which he held until 1996. 2 years later, Christer Pettersson, a small-time criminal and drug addict, was arrested, tried and convicted for Palme's murder. Pettersson's conviction was later overturned on appeal to the Svea Court of Appeal. The crime remains unsolved and alternative theories as to who carried out the murder have since been proposed. In January 2011 the German magazine Focus cited German interrogation records in connection with another investigation from 2008 as showing that the assassination had been carried out by an operative of the Yugoslavian UDBA who now lives in Zagreb, Croatia. See also: List of Olof Palme memorials, for a list of memorials and places named after Olof Palme. Olof Palme Street, for a list of streets named after Olof Palme. Olof Palme International Center, Olof Palme Prize, List of peace activists, Anna Lindh Gustav III of Sweden, Bernt Carlsson, Folk Bernadotte, Dag Hammarskjöld Paragraph LD, Caleb J. Anderson. Notes. Bibliography. External links, Olof Palme Archives, Olof Palme Memorial Fund, Olof Palme International Center.